relationships when they're great are really good, but when they're abusive, it's so challenging. In
Yeah,
terms of the work that I do, it's so challenging for those that find themselves in an abusive relationship.
right. Yeah, correct. And so that's the reason why we want to be looking at what a healthy relationship looks like and what an unhealthy relationship.
Yes, Sulu.
Yeah.
It's funny that you
So
say that because
yeah.
sometimes, as you know, you mentioned I deliver training, and sometimes we do this exercise, this activity where we ask people to write down, you know, traits of a healthy relationship. What does a healthy relationship look like, and what does an unhealthy relationship look like? And the majority of the time, those that have experienced domestic abuse, you'll find that they're able to, just reel off different characteristics, different behaviors of a perpetrator and what they've endured. But when it comes to looking at what a healthy relationship, it gets a bit lost. The list becomes a lot shorter because, you enter into the relationship hoping that it is a healthy relationship, but then you find yourself in an unhealthy relationship. I think in that there's so many layers for the victim survivor to actually reflect upon to ensure that they don't end up in repetition in terms of going back into an abusive relationship. And there's something that I share, and I hope you don't mind me sharing, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this story
Yeah.
that I'm going to share with you in brief. This lady, she needed to get to an appointment, and I'm going to say that she needed to get there for 5 o'clock, and it's now 20 to 5, and she's thinking, I'm going to be late for this appointment. So she calls an Uber, and the Uber turns up quite promptly, as they do. Within like 3 minutes, they were at, the destination where she was at that particular time. So they arrived at the address that she was at. And they also equally knew the address that she wanted to go to. But she was so familiar with this route that when the Uber driver started to journey on towards this address that she needed to attend for her appointment, she thought, hold on a minute, why is he going this way? Why is he going this way? She says, if he just puts his foot down and goes straight, one, I'm going to get there on time, and two, I know where I'm going. But she knew at that time that they both had different motives. Why? Because the driver gets paid for the distance that he travels when he's transporting a passenger. But the client, she knew that she had to be there at a specific time. So she was able to say to the driver, no, stop right there. I want you to go this way because I know that I'm going to get there at 2 minutes
Quicker.
or 3 minutes to 5, as opposed to getting there late. And I say that to say that sometimes when you encounter into a relationship, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, then the other person can take you absolutely anywhere because you don't know your direction. So I just want to encourage someone out there today that, do you know what you want in a relationship? Because unless you know what you want, then you'll be on somebody else's journey as opposed to your journey. You'll be taking the long route. You may not even reach your destination if you don't know where you're going. And equally, if you can't communicate, if you're not able to communicate to say, stop, I want to get off. Stop, I want you to go this way. Stop, I don't like what's happening in this relationship. We need to have a conversation. So I thought I'd just share that with you this morning. My
Very
story.
important. Very
Very
important.
important.
Because if you do not define where you're heading for, someone else will help you to define and the route as well, which may take you longer. Yeah. So that's very, important. And that brings us to the issue or to the subject matter of equality versus power and control bill.
Yeah.
Do you want to just give, because our listeners are not here, even those viewing on Facebook won't be able to see these wheels. There are two wheels before us. We've
Yeah.
got the equality wheel, and we have also got the power and control wheel. If you
Yeah.
just tell our listeners briefly what this is all about and how it
Okay.
relates to domestic abuse.
Okay, it's basically what we've been talking about so far in the last couple of minutes, Ulu. It's about, what an unhealthy relationship looks like, which is based on, as you can see, is based on power and control. So this individual, the perpetrator of domestic abuse, their aim is power over the victim and to control the victim. But a healthy relationship, as you can see, is about equality. It's about, if I say something, if we're going to have a conversation, if there's going to be conflict, that we can actually have a respectful conversation in order to find middle ground. Everybody wins when you're in a healthy relationship, because that is the aim. If you're always losing the argument, not getting, your needs are not met, then surely it's time to kind of evaluate and see where you are. So in terms of like characteristics and red flags, again, I'm going to refer to the work that I do. When we do an initial assessment with a victim survivor, one of the questions that we would ask you is, were there any red flags? Because we want to know about the incidents that have happened and the kind of journey that you've been on to get an idea of the dynamics of the relationship. And a majority of the time, people will say that there were red flags. And in the power and control wheel, which you can find on Google, for those that have access to Google, you can go on Google and find the power and control wheel.
Okay.
But they will. So in terms of the power and control, I just lost my trail of thought. Sorry. Yeah. So in terms of that, you can see that they use things like intimidation. But before we kind of look at the different areas and the different behaviors, one of the things that I want to say about a perpetrator of domestic abuse is that they will lack, when they've done something wrong, when they're doing something to hurt you, they will lack that empathy.
Oh, I see.
They will lack that empathy in terms of your own feelings. Instead of saying sorry and not repeating it, some might even enjoy the fact that they know that they're causing you anxiety, causing you pain, actually hurting you. Because it's part of the power and control. If you're able to turn around and say, no, stop that, I'm sure that they would be like, oh, wow, she's going to fight back. She's going to say something. But if the more that you endure it, I think the more that they feel more esteemed in themselves, that they're actually controlling you. So lack of empathy, lack of regard for someone's feelings. So looking at the power and control wheel, Olu, where do you want to start in terms of that?
Ideally, we should be looking at intimidation, to be honest. I think that's usually where it starts, where perpetrators begin to give conditions that are not, acceptable or that are not friendly to any human being, treating people as if they are not human beings, making people afraid, and I believe that's where it starts from until it begins to affect people's emotions. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely, Olu.
And then there is always this weapon or strategy that abusers use. trying to socially isolate their victims, all in the bid to keep on controlling them, to wanting them to be at their own bidding, so to say. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's a cycle, and these are the various stages that we can see on the wheel, controlling what he or she does. Now, I'm being careful to bring in the issue of gender because males too suffer these things that we are talking about. And so he or she could be controlled, who she sees or she talks to, what he or she reads, where he or she goes, limiting connections with other people in that social setting, and then being jealous, and then wanting to justify their actions. These are all the moves and the actions of abusers or perpetrators. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think
That's what I've got on this side of the wheel,
Yeah, absolutely, Olu.
And then it
Yeah.
further goes to the area where, to the extent of where perpetrators make light of their abuse. They're not taking anything seriously. It's just as you said now, they are never bothered. They consider abuse as something that is a normal life, that as if it doesn't really matter, it didn't even happen. And then not wanting to take responsibility for their abusive behaviors. Pointing accusing fingers that the other party is the reason for the abuse. So that's what I've got on the right. And I can just imagine that if we are to use an arrow, it runs from the top right down and then to the left side, and then it completes the cycle with in the area of coercion and threats. Am I correct? Is there any such thing?
I think all that you've said, is absolutely right in what you've said. And the thing is, in terms of an abusive relationship, and Uli, we can have a conversation about this, that you get into a relationship and at first when you meet that individual, there's a honeymoon period, where it feels good and, we're respectful and, it's, you feel that, oh, is this the one? And you're falling in love with this individual. I run a program, it's called What's Love Got to Do with It? Because if you've been in a relationship and you're being abused, what does love have to do with it? When you love something, Kula, you look after it, you nurture it.
Yeah.
When you don't have a regard for that particular thing, then you're quite dismissive in terms of the consequences of your negative behavior towards that individual. And but because of the way that it subtly starts, slowly, little by little, it's just, you don't realize at first. There might be things that happen that are red flags, but for some they will run away as soon as they see red flags. And I've said to you, I've shared with you that I was a child that witnessed domestic abuse, and unfortunately later on I almost, well, I'm going to say that I entered into a relationship that was abusive, but for me, I was able to get out of it really, really quickly. And the reason why is because it was physical abuse. It wasn't so much the verbal, there was power and there was control, but it was the physical abuse that made me get out really, really quickly. But in the first instance, you would not have known that this person was going to become physically abusive towards myself. And similarly, and I just say that because I've got so much empathy for people that find themselves in an abusive relationship. they're not to blame. People might want to point their fingers, be discriminative, be judgmental, and things like that. But if you're in a healthy relationship, that's absolutely amazing. That's really great. And most people that have been or are in an abusive relationship, that is what they thought their end goal was going to be. They had no idea that this person was going to become abusive towards them. Yeah. So, abuse is when somebody, as we've already said, has no regard for your feelings. Somebody that, oversteps their boundaries. And we talked about that, the importance of knowing what your boundaries are, because if you don't know what your boundaries are, and you don't know how to communicate when your boundaries are pushed, then that individual is going to constantly push against those boundaries. But when you're able to find your voice and say, do you know what, that is not appropriate. I'm not going to put up with that kind of behavior. I'm not going to be treated in that way. Then it will give them time to think, oh, hold on a minute. She is not going to allow me to control her. And if they can continue, then that's the appropriate time for you to evaluate that relationship.
Absolutely.
To evaluate that relationship, to say, okay, where is this going? Am I getting what I want from this relationship? And if you're in an abusive relationship and you're listening to us on 97.1 FM today, and you feel that your boundaries are constantly pushed, if you feel that this your partner, whether it be a male, as Olu already said, that it affects both genders, but if you feel that your boundaries are constantly pushed, if you feel that your feelings and your needs are disregarded, if you feel like you're walking on eggshells, if the abuse towards you is repetitive, then maybe you're in an abusive relationship.